I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 8 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website, so you are aware the website will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. For members participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in a committee room. Keep in mind the Board of Internal Economy's guidelines for mask use and health protocols. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the Proceedings and Verification Officer. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. A reminder that all comments by members should be addressed through the chair. And with regard to the speaking list, the committee clerk will advise the chair on whose hands are up to the best of his ability. And we will do the best we can to maintain consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. Pursuant to the order adopted by the House of Commons on Tuesday, December 7th, 2021, and the motion adopted on Tuesday, December 14th, 2021. The committee is studying illegal arms trafficking and the increase in gun crimes committed by members of the street gangs. With us today by video conference, Communities for Zero Tolerance, Evelyn Fox, founder, Keep 6, Richard Miller, founder. Up to 5 minutes will be given for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. Witnesses may choose to split their allotted time for opening remarks with other witnesses if they so desire. Welcome to everyone. I now invite Ms. Fox to make
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Point of order. Yes, Mr. McGregor.
Oh, it's Mr. Lloyd, Mr. Chair.
Oh, Mr. Lloyd, sorry. Where are you? There you are.
Yes. Given that this committee has started half an hour late, I think it would only be fair to the witnesses if we were to allow 45 minutes for the first round and then 45 minutes for the second round, so that we can have an equal weighting for witnesses, because it looks like this first panel will get about less than half an hour to discuss that. Has there been any deliberations by you and the clerk chair to address this shortened timeline?
Only that if we need it, we can add extra time at the end of the meeting. And I'm told that that extra time could be up to about 15 minutes. So I'll be as efficient as I can, Mr. Lloyd, and as fair as I can be, including allowing this first panel to go longer than the allotted time. Okay? All right. So.
Sorry, Chair, just on that point of order, I understand. Yeah. In previously, we've been able to get in other committees the full 2 hours when we started later. So are we not able to go until 1:30?
Fine with me. Clerk, can we go as late as to 1:30 Eastern?
Mr. Chair, we should be able to do so, yes.
All right. So that will be our goal. So the
point of order, Mr. Chair?
Yes, point of order.
Do we require unanimous consent to extend the timeline of the meeting? Some of us do have some things planned after the meeting, and like I could do the 15 minutes extra, but certainly not an extra half an hour.
Clerk?
Mr. Chair, you may request unanimous consent from the committee to go beyond the 15 minutes, but it's at the discretion of the committee to decide collectively or...
Do we require unanimous consent to go beyond the 15 minutes?
Is that question directed at the committee or me, Mr. Chair?
It's directed to you, Clerk.
You may, sir, yes. But it's not necessary to go for the first 15 minutes. It's not necessary. Beyond that, you may request if one of the members has requested unanimous consent.
Well, let's see where we're at 15 minutes after the hour, and then we'll consult the committee on how they want to proceed. Okay? All right.
Sorry,
So,
Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Demoff.
We should decide now because it will determine how long these witnesses are here. If we're able to go to 1:30, which I don't think you need unanimous consent for, then we can do a full hour with these two witnesses and a full hour with our second panel. So I wonder if we could determine that now, because otherwise it's going to impact. And I really don't want to spend too much time talking about this because we're taking into the witnesses' time, right?
Yeah, exactly. So let me just ask the committee, is it your view that we ought to go to 30 minutes after the hour? Well, the consensus is that we should. So let's note that there is a member of the committee. So let's proceed. I would now like to invite Ms. Fox to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you. And my organization is Communities for Zero Violence. So thank you for inviting me to speak in this forum. My name is Evelyn Fox. I'm the founder of Communities for Zero Violence, a nonprofit agency that provides peer-led supports to homicide survivors and victims of community violence as a way to interrupt the cycle. Communities for Zero Violence was formed 8 months after the homicide of my eldest son, Kissinger Gunn, in 2016. Over the past 5.5 years, I've taught myself about the firearm laws and regulations, educated myself on the chief firearms officer's functioning, and taken the firearm safety course just for the knowledge, and was very impressed to hear the instructor's constant reminders of how to handle and store a firearm safely. Every instance of violence has an intervention point that has been overlooked or not been acted upon by either people closest to that person, service providers, or those in positions of power whose job it is to intervene. For instance, you can imagine my surprise when I learned that only 10% of personal references are contacted when someone initially applies for their, and none of the references contacted when renewing the license, especially app trainer emphasizing the fact that the references would be contacted before being approved for the license. How is this ensuring public safety? Why are references not being contacted? We live beside a country that has a patchwork system to regulate firearms that are illegally seeping through our borders in one form or another. CBSA is only required to inspect 1% of each shipping container that comes over our borders, 1 of every 100. CBSA has seized vehicles at the border with multiple firearms hidden in them. How many times have those individuals smuggling the firearms been successful before getting caught? How will this be addressed? What improvements to the borders will be implemented? More regulation for firearms in Canada is as a way to eliminate community and gang violence when all of the community level violence is being committed by those who are not licensed to possess or use them will not be effective. Canada has adequate laws for firearm ownership, and the gatekeepers of ensuring our laws remain intact and strong have done an amazing job keeping them this way. The talk of allowing the municipalities and provinces to ban firearms within their borders is an American-style regulation that we know does not work, and to even suggest it is irresponsible and not in the best interest of any Canadian. There has been discussion after discussion, report after report, with all the same recommendations for the past 14 years about addressing the social determinants of health and investing in communities across Canada. And still a gun ban and more regulation of firearms is a primary focus of investment. The significant polarization of opinions do not allow us to have an honest and meaningful discussion about the gun violence across about a firearm ban without speaking about banning poverty and all the underlying issues that stem from it. We have traumatized communities that are never able to heal due to the continued occurrences of violence and the lack of resources to provide them support. When my son Kissinger was killed, my younger son was 12. He went from being a straight A student with aspirations of being a human rights lawyer with the United Nations to failing all of his classes due to his inability to focus and his invasive thoughts. He started engaging in at-risk behavior and self-medicating. He started engaging in illegal activities that started to escalate into various serious crimes. And if I hadn't done everything I could to intervene, he was destined to end up being killed or killing someone else. This is what all levels of government should be focusing on. There should be proactive, not reactive approaches to eliminating the violence. The Roots of Youth Violence report that outlines the most pervasive risk factors of why youth engage in violent acts was issued in 2008. All levels of government are aware of the risk factors and recommendations set out in the report, and every party since, in majority, has cut to the areas of recommendation and are now surprised that we have escalating community and gang violence. Our communities are in crisis and is long past due to do what is right by Canadians whose voices have been largely ignored, who deserve gainful opportunities to enrich their communities and their lives. Those of us who have had our loved ones murdered are real people who suffer with real trauma. We deserve to have the support of our elected officials to make our communities safe. We should feel safe enough to allow our children to go to school, play in playgrounds, attend social events and recreational facilities without the fear of them not returning due to the escalating violence that is terrorizing our cities. Community safety is a right my son had to go out and enjoy his time with his fiance, a right to return home after enjoying his night, a right to exist free from violence wherever he chose to travel throughout the city, throughout our province and our country. That
Ms.
right
Fox,
is,
I'm sorry for having to interrupt, but
That's
the
okay.
the 5 minutes are up. And just please accept from me and from all members of the committee our sincerest condolences about your loss.
Thank you.
We grieve with you. Mr. Miller, you now have the floor for up to 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Please proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. I want to thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this very important conversation. I'm Richard Miller, the founder of Keep Six nonprofit organization. Keep Six engages with individuals who have had their lives affected by the criminal justice system. I have lived experience within the justice system. Therefore, I believe I can speak to the issues concerning an individual who has made bad decision, consequently ended up in the justice system. There are a couple points I would like to address. Keep Six developed a program called Gangs for Tuition. This program gives individuals an opportunity to trade gang lifestyle for education in skilled trade and the tech sector by means of mentorship, expert delivered training programs, along with life coaching. Gangs for Tuition carries a follow-up component to ensure success of the participant by keeping participant accountable for each aspect of the program. I am here today to partner with you in order to continue to grow this program on a national level in order to affect positive changes in the following areas. Reduce crime rate by providing them with a positive lifestyle through acquaintance transferable skills, set and training, leading to employment and sustainable self-sufficient living. Economic empowerment. Young adults or empowered through financial literature to make investment in their own health and education. Mental health issues. Keep Six provide a mental health counseling to individuals who are registered in our Gangs for Tuition program. Education about the public safety, targeting at-risk youth, targeting young adults before they get into trouble. Most of them from single family with no guidance. Programs allow them the opportunity through mentorship to live a life without violence. Keep Six has a program that allows individuals to turn in a firearm to our program, which in turn turn over to the police department. Individuals within our programs are given ongoing support. As you're aware, 90% of individuals incarcerated have a mental health concern. Consequently, Keep Six provides counseling sessions on mental health for individuals in our program. Organizations like Keep Six continue to find ways to reduce the amount of guns in our community, which in turn will put the end to violence. Keep Six is a nonprofit organization, is willing and ready to partner with any organization to ensure the safety of the public. I thank you for this opportunity to speak on this platform. My desire is to garner the support to continue this work, which we have been doing for the past 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. Now I open the floor for questions, and to lead us off, Mr. Lloyd, you have 6 minutes. The floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Fox and Mr. Miller, for your testimony. And I want to start by saying thank you for the excellent work that you're doing in our communities. Throughout this committee, the words that you have put forward have been echoed by law enforcement, that we need more investment in community-based approaches, and that we are woefully underfunding community-based approaches to divert at-risk youth from a life of crime, and to get people who are in a life of crime to divert away from a life of crime. What specific measures do you think this committee could recommend that would be most effective for the government to dedicate resources to reduce gun violence, reduce youth in gang activity? Thank you. I guess Ms. Fox, I'll go for you first.
Thank you. So in 2008, as I said, the Roots of Youth Violence report was released after the 2005 Year of the Gun issue we had in the city of Toronto. And outlined in that report is various recommendations that were put out from the provincial government to tackle the youth engage in the violence. So poverty is one of the number one issues, and the rest kind of filtered down in terms of systemic racism. You have the education system, you have the lack of housing. Like anybody who's been to Toronto or Vancouver knows that the cost of living in our cities is unbelievable. It's not, you can't survive in this city unless you're an upper income person. So it's not surprising that we have the level of violence that we have when we are continuing to see the financial gaps grow, and people are just trying to survive. The trauma that is left in these communities, some people that I support have lost more than one family member and friend, like multiple people. They never have a chance to even attempt to heal before another one is taken. So we don't have hardly any services that cater to community violence, which is one of the reasons why I started my organization, because trying to find myself and my children continuous supports was horrible. It was absolutely horrible trying to navigate. And I work in social services. So it's very difficult to find the resources that are culturally specific and that people have the ability to connect with to deal with the trauma that they've been exposed to. You have children who are growing up through all of this trauma, and it's becoming somewhat normal to them, to the point where what would we expect them to do living in this environment?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Maybe I will go to Mr. Miller, but my final quick question, Ms. Fox. I mean, clearly there's a potential plan by this government to spend up to $1 billion, perhaps more, to buy back firearms, which we know will be predominantly bought back from legal owners, and which will primarily be long guns, not handguns. Do you think this would have any impact on the youth you're talking about and the people involved in a life of crime? Is this going to have any impact on them? And do you think that $1 billion could be better spent on the programs that you're saying are needed?
Short answer would be no, it would not have any effect at all. long answer would be that it absolutely infuriates me that the government that is supposed to be acting on our behalf is willing to dump more than $1 billion into a buyback from legal owners, and 250 million that's been promised over the past 6 years that still hasn't been filtered down to the provinces and the municipalities. And $250 million is a drop in the bucket to what the communities across Canada require to do the real work.
Thank you so much. Mr. Miller, thoughts on my first line?
Can you just repeat the question again, please?
Well, I guess we're seeing the youth getting involved in life of crime. Thank you for the work that you've been doing in that. What sort of funding do you think? What sort of specific programs do you think are required that would be most effective at diverting youth from a life of crime, and if they are in a life of crime, getting them out of a life of crime?
From the work that we've been doing, one of the main factor is the employment and the trade. We find that individuals are able to be in a setting where they feel they're given back, but also they're able to provide for themselves. I'll just give you a brief example. We have individuals who are into the trades in the union, and these individuals or young people who comes from the marginalized community are making a $37 an hour. So you have an individual who is having a $60,000 a year income starting out. So that there alone itself says a lot. And it gives these individuals a more positive aspect of not, as they would say to me, looking over their back, So that is my first take on it. The next thing is we have to deal with the trauma. We look at incarceration.
Wrap it up, please. Wrap it up in 10 seconds, please, Mr. Miller.
Sure. We have to look at dealing with the trauma that they have gone through, because that plays a big aspect for their actions and their behavior.
Thank you very much. Now I would turn the microphone over to Mr. Noor Mohammed. You have 6 minutes. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll be sharing my time with Mr. McKinnon. Mr. Miller, I'm asking you this question with the backdrop of the murder of the 18-year-old youth yesterday at David and Mary Thompson High School in Scarborough. His grandmother actually is a colleague of my partner. And so I ask you this question reflecting on the work that you do, which, by the way, is incredible, and I want to thank you for what you do. You've made it clear that getting these weapons off the streets, getting guns off the streets and out of the hands of young people is critical. Can you share with us two things? One, why is it critical to take these weapons off the streets, and what should we as legislators be doing to make sure that that happens?
The reason why it's important to take the guns off the streets from the hands of these young people is the fact that we have young people who are resorting to a desperate measures with these firearms. If we're able to get these firearms off the street out of the hands of these young people, we're able to then deal with the issues that they are suffering from within and put them on a more positive path. So once we are able to curb the weapon issue itself, we can address and work with these young people. Because at the end of the day, we have to look, there's an underminer issue within every one of these individuals who are getting into the situation with firearms.
And one more question for you. How easy is it for these young people to get weapons right now?
And individuals can go out, and I'm sure if you were able to go to the right place in the city, an individual can get themselves probably on a 3-hour basis top a firearm.
It's a lot for us to think about. Thank you, Mr. Miller. And I appreciate, again, as I said, everything that you do. I'll yield the rest of my time to Mr. McKinnon.
Thank you, Mr. Mohammed. Mr. Miller, I'm just wondering if you could comment on the origins of the firearms that are being used here. it seems if we get rid of legal firearms, we understand that there's also an emerging opportunity to create weapons, ghost guns, as you will, with printed parts and so forth. I wonder if you can comment on these other sources of firearms and whether they're a factor.
When it comes to getting rid of firearms and the issue, the issue is not arising from the legal individual who has a registered firearm. The firearms that is committing the crime is not the firearm that was registered Mrs. Johnson or Mr. Johnson has, unless there was a break and enter in this project. These firearms are being transported in the underground sector into the country through the borders in different ways. So we have to look at that. Even just briefly speaking about the buyback program. We have to look at, has anyone ever taken the time to look at even the firearms that turn in from the buyback program? These are not the firearms that's committed in the murders in our community. These are the firearms that Mrs. Johnson and Tom had, and he might have passed away, and the family members getting rid of it. So if we're going to spend a lot of money into these, we have to focus on the actual issue.
Thank you. So the actual issue is not the buyback of legal firearms. It is the black market trade in firearms. Is that what you say?
That is correct.
Yeah. And so how do we best stifle this black market trade?
Well, the black market trade itself is something I feel best we need to educate. Education plays a big role. And unless you give individuals the opportunity to succeed and give them other resources, we're still in the same boat, right? So it comes down to the education. So one of the things that we particularly focus on is education piece for these individuals. The choices and the consequences that you'll be looking for go down that path. So if we are able to catch them at a younger age, then we're able to program their mind and give them these resources that are available to them, right? So when I hear a young man says, well, you're coming here to tell us that we can go into the union and be making $30 an hour. We've never had anyone come here and show us that, right? So now they have other resources that's available that they never knew about that can make healthy choices.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. I believe that's my time, Mr. Chair.
Well, you've got 30 seconds if you would like to use them. If not, we'll move on.
We'll move on. Thank you.
Okay. Then I would like to ask Ms. Michaud to take to the microphone. She has 6 minutes. The floor is yours. Please proceed.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. And my condolences, Ms. Fox, for your loss. Thank you very much for your commitment. You were saying in your opening remarks that you've educated yourself on the question. You're trying to change things, so that is really wonderful. And you did say something. You said that the federal government is working where the municipalities are responsible with respect to prohibiting arms, and I don't think that's a good idea either. But I think maybe that there is a lack of political courage by the firearms lobby, and I think that in my riding, there are 56 municipalities. So imagine if from one municipality to another the rules were different, and if it's provincial, well, some are more inclined to legislate and some don't want to prohibit firearms. So I'd like to know what you think the solution is. So do you think it's the federal government that is responsible?
Thank you. Yes. If there was to be a ban implemented, it would most definitely have to be a federal ban. Copping out to provinces and municipalities isn't going to do anything. We have people who travel back and forth. We have people who are on Canada-wide warrants who travel from province to province to province without detection. The municipalities and provinces don't have border control. There's no way to regulate that. And we see how it works in the States. It doesn't work. It's not right to try to make the municipalities and provinces responsible for that. That is a federal issue that needs to be governed by the federal government.
Merci pour la réponse et je comprends que...
Thank you for your answer. And you are committed to work against guns, but I'm wondering, when you know about there's suicides and there's mass murders and there is the buyback program, but do you think it's legitimate that the federal government should also be being involved with that, and that they should be asking people who own firearms, and maybe I think it's since 2020, but if people have a firearm that is not on the list, but it may be similar to a firearm that is on the list, what do you think the federal government should do in that instance?
I think that like I said previously, every act of violence, whether it's suicide, whether it's a mass shooting, whatever the case may be, there is always an intervention point. And that person has been failed by whomever, whether it's the person closest to them, a service provider, or even those who, like I said, who it's their job to ensure that person's safety, has failed in intervening. So I don't think that a gun ban against legal owners is the right solution. We also have, as I said, only 10% of the references for the PAL license to own a firearm, only 10% of the references are checked. Why is that? If we have an issue with domestic violence and women are concerned for their safety, then if their partner has a firearm, why would all the references not be checked? Why would they not be checked to get the license and to renew the license? If the partner signs the application, then that's deemed as their consent and they're not even contacted to get feedback. So I'm surprised actually that it is that way, considering we're so honed in on firearm regulation. Why is it that those references are not 100% checked? Because that's what I was informed in the safety course, is that those references would all be checked to ensure that I was a safe enough person to attain that license.
Je suis d'accord avec vous dans la loi.
I agree with you. In C71, it's not clear with respect to the verification process. And if we follow all of the elements that would allow somebody to get a firearm. On another subject, you said that we should have more of a community approach, and with respect to massive financing of the police or other agencies. So what type of prevention do you think it would be good?
I think that not so much funding into the police. The police are a reactive response. They are not a proactive response. I think that programs like Marcel Wilson's with the One by One movement, who does gang intervention, I think that trauma support is a major factor, because once you have experienced the homicide of a loved one, you literally lose your mind. It is the most horrible experience I have ever had to experience in my life, and I will never be the same person that I once was. I had thoughts of suicide, and my son going out of control to get involved, because I couldn't function. People have to leave their jobs because they can't function anymore. People see their other children spiraling out of control, and they don't have what it takes to intervene. So, I mean, the cycle of violence it's very real and very serious. We need to address the root causes. That is what needs to be done. And we've had person after person in this forum speak about it. And for 14 years have had the same community leaders speaking about the same thing. And still, it's the voices of the people in anomaly situations that are not affected by the everyday violence that are overheard over the people who live this day to day. That it's extremely frustrating, but that's what needs to happen. The social determinants of health and the root causes, that is where it lies. And if we had done it 14 years ago, we would not be in this place today.
Merci infiniment, Madame Fox.
Thank you very much, Madame Fox. I believe my time is up. I don't see Mr. Chair on the screen, so I think that might be a technical problem. So I think I'd like to stop right now in terms of my questioning. Thank you.
Clerk, did we lose our chair?
Le greffier semble au téléphone.
We lost the chair for a moment. He will be reconnected. One of the vice chairs can take over. Mr. Lloyd.
I'll just move in here and give the time to Mr. McGregor.
Madame Madame Michaud, si vous pouvez.
Madame Michaud, can you be vice chair? Can you take on that responsibility? Yes, I would think that we will now have Mr. McGregor for 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Nice to see you in that role. With apologies to Mr. Miller and Mr. Fox, I appreciate your testimony. I just need to take my time to move a motion that I gave notice to the committee on. So, Madam Chair, the motion I'm moving reads as follows. Everyone had notice on Friday. It reads that the committee invite the Minister of Public Safety and department officials from both the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and Canada Border Services Agency to appear as soon as possible before the committee to answer questions regarding the occupation of Ottawa and the federal government's response to convoy blockades disrupting our borders, notably in Windsor, Ontario, Emerson, Manitoba, and Coutts, Alberta. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. I am open to interpretation on what as soon as possible means, and I'm happy to have that conversation with colleagues offline, but I'll just keep it at that. The motion's been moved, and I invite comments from my colleagues. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Will we be debating that right now, Mr. Chair? Mr. Clerk? Go ahead, Madame Damas.
Merci, Madame le Président.
Thank you, Madame Chair.
Thank my colleague for bringing this motion forward, and I think we all feel that we want to get some answers about what has been transpiring. I am going to propose an amendment, and I hope it's acceptable to the mover in the committee. We do have a broader study where we can do a deeper dive that my Liberal colleague brought forward, I think it was last week. But since, Mr. McGregor, and since you provided this motion, the Emergency Act has been invoked. And part of that act legislates a parliamentary review committee to review the actions under the act. In addition, the agencies named in this motion, rightly so, are focused on the emergency that is transpiring across our country right now. So I would propose the following amendment. It would, after the words "as soon as possible," adding "following the revocation or expiry of the Emergencies Act." So in that way, we would be able to actually get answers from these agencies, because the emergency is happening while we're speaking, and they will not be at liberty to talk operationally about what's happening. So basically, it would be that the groups and the minister named in the member's motion would come as soon as possible after the Emergencies Act expired.
Merci, Madame Damoff. Je vois qu'il y a une...
Thank you, Madame Damoff. I saw somebody raise their hand. I'm not sure who that was. I'm sorry. I don't know who, but I think I'll go to Mr. Lloyd first. I'm not sure who was first.
Thanks. I think the chair is back now, but I'd be Mr. on this amendment from the Liberals.
Go ahead, Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, Chair. Good to see you back. I appreciate Ms. Damoff's amendment. I am leaning to being against it, and I'll state my reasons. Yes, very much so. I understand the Emergencies Act was brought into force yesterday. However, I am interested not so much on our security and law enforcement services tasks during or under the Emergencies Act, but rather over the last 2 weeks. Like, I think we as a committee have legitimate questions about how things fell apart so quickly. And I'm really interested in just having a deep dive over how did we get to where we're at over the last 2 weeks. So that's why I'm interested in maybe not voting in favor of the amendment, but keeping the original motion as is. I know from talking with my Conservative colleagues offline that there might be some interest in adding the Ontario Provincial Police. I'm definitely in favor of that amendment as well.
Mr. McKinnon, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Chair.
You're on mute.
Sorry, I just wanted to speak in support of Ms. Damoff's amendment. I think it is incredibly important that we hear from the people that Mr. McGregor has mentioned, as well as potentially the Ontario Police Service as well. The problem is we're in the throes of this at this time. And, you know, while you might want to talk about, we might want to talk about what has gone on, we are still in the throes of things. And the people involved are not going to speak about ongoing operational measures. They just can't. And they also need to be heads down working the problem as well. So I would be happy to support the amendment, but without the amendment, I'm not going to be able to support the Mr. McGregor's excellent idea, but I can't support it at this time.
Mr. Lloyd, I see your hand up, or is that from before?
Si je peux me permettre, Monsieur le Président, Monsieur Noor.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Noor Mohammed had his hand up for a moment, and another also.
Mr. Chair, do I have the floor?
I was away. Whose hand was up first?
These hands came up after you came.
Ms. Noor Mohammed.
Okay, I'll take the from the Mr.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, you know, I very much think that where Mr. McGregor is headed is important. Now, I would want to see us really think about, you know, whether it's the OPP, whether it's Ottawa Police Services, who else would want to be added? You know, speaking from my time in the department, the one thing that I will tell you is that it is unlikely that we are going to get answers to any of the questions that we would have, because even though the Emergencies Act has been invoked, many of these things are still going to be considered ongoing operations. So whether or not we're able to get the answers, I don't know, which is why I think Ms. Damoff's amendment actually helps us to get to where we want to go. I think it would be deeply disappointing if we got everybody together during this process and what we got a lot of was, I can't tell you that right now because it's an ongoing operation. So I do think this is an important thing for us to consider. With that amendment, I would be supportive, and I do think that we may want to consider through the next little while what else we might want to add to that to make sure that it does give us, in the fullness of time, what we actually need. And Mr. McGregor, what I think you're trying to get at, which I think is very important.
Mr. Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm inclined to agree with Mr. McGregor. I don't support this amendment from our colleague, our Liberal colleague. I think this is an important study. You know, there is an ongoing operation, as they said, but, you know, Mr. McGregor is asking a very reasonable thing to this committee to explore, you know, what's been going on for weeks in this country. And, And yes, I'm aware there's a parliamentary review committee that will be struck up because of this legislation, but we've seen committees even as of last week and this week studying similar things. So I will not be supporting the Liberal motion. I think it's a positive motion for us to look forward. I'll be supporting Mr. McGregor's original motion with a proposed amendment to add the OPP, but I won't move that now. I'll just indicate that's where I stand. Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, clerk, we're ready, I believe, to. Yes.
We still have a few hands up.
Oh, I don't see any hands up.
Yes, in the room.
Who's got a hand up? Okay.
We have. So
tell me, I can't see the room.
Sure. So we have
the room is a postage stamp, so you'll have to tell me whose hands are up.
We have Mr. Van Popta, and then Mr. Shipley, and then Madame Michaud.
Okay. Well, let's go in that order, and you call them because I can't see them.
I believe I'm next, Mr. Van Popta. So, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Yep.
And I agree with my colleague, Mr. Lloyd, who just spoke previously. I think that this is a very important motion that Mr. McGregor is putting forward, and I would support it. Of course, with the amendment that, which it sounds like he is agreeing to, that the OPP be added. I understand Ms. Demoff's arguments, but I don't think I don't think they're convincing. You know, like everything is always a moving target, but that doesn't stop us from studying it. I believe that it's just very timely for us to get the witnesses in here now, for us to understand what is going on. That's the work that the Public Safety Committee should be doing, and I certainly support that we go ahead with it as soon as possible. Thank you.
Who's next with a hand up in the room, clerk?
Mr. Shipley.
Mr. Shipley, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I also feel that Mr. McGregor's motion was quite appropriate. I won't be supporting the amendment to that by Ms. Damoff. We are getting tons of questions, I'm sure all of us as parliamentarians, as to what's going on right now. Our emails are getting blanketed every day. People are looking for questions now. They're looking for what's going on and how this is going to get resolved. So I definitely think now is the time to do it. I'll be supporting Mr. McGregor's motion and not the amendment. With the amendment, though, of the OPP being added in there, a lot of these instances that have been taking place with a tremendous amount of OPP support. I hear they're quite involved in the Ottawa situation now. Many of the border crossings have been handled. I'm seeing a lot of OPP uniforms of those, so I like that amendment being added to it. But definitely now is the time to be looking at this. It's not time to put this off. Our constituents and our residents are looking for these answers now, not later. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I believe there's one more hand up in the room. Clerk, who would that be?
Madame Michaud, Mr. Chair.
Merci.
Madame Michaud, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with what Mr. Shipley has just said. I think it's a good motion, Mr. McGregor's motion. And as soon as possible within the motion, I think that we should be flexible and maybe decide as to when this could happen in a subcommittee, and maybe following this study or maybe earlier. We should have this conversation. So I would support the motion and not the amendment. I think that this is a great idea, so I will support. Thank you.
Ms. Demoff, I see your hand up.
Just really quickly, Chair, I think it's important to note again, we are actually studying this issue in depth. So this isn't a one-time opportunity to hear from these. We've already approved a study that will include a number of these issues. Having said that, I've given my arguments for why the amendment is useful, and it seems pretty obvious it's going to fail, so I'll leave it there.
No more hands in the room, Mr. Chair.
You're on mute, Mr. Chair.
I don't see any hands anywhere. So, clerk, let's move to calling for the votes. The motion as amended would be up first. So do that roll call.
So the question is on the motion moved by Ms. Damoff. Ms. Damoff?
Yes.
Yes, that's right.
Mr. Chang? Mr. Chang?
You looking at me, Mr. Clerk? Yes, I support the amendment.
Mr. McKinnon? Unmute, sir.
Yes, I support the amendment.
Mr. Zubairi?
In favor of the amendment.
Mr. Mohammed?
In favor.
Mr. Melilo?
Against.
Mr. Lloyd?
Against.
Mr. Shipley?
Against.
Mr. Van Popta?
Against.
Madame Michaud?
Contre.
Mr. McGregor?
Against.
Mr. Chair? Yeas pour 5-5, nays contre 6-6.
So the motion as amended does not pass. So we move now to the main motion. Do the roll call, please, clerk.
Mr. Chair, point of order. Well, not point of order, but
Yes, go ahead.
I believe now we're debating the main motion instead of, we don't necessarily have to jump to a vote right away on this.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
And so I want to move an amendment that I indicated previous, that we add the OPP to the list of witnesses. I think it's been very clear to everyone throughout the past number of weeks with the police forces across the country. And I think as a public safety committee, it would be very important for us to review that coordination between police services. I think there's a lot of Canadians, particularly people in Ottawa, who are quite upset by what they perceive, rightly or wrongly, to be a lack of action by the Ottawa police force, and questions about what would the role be of the OPP. We also know, yesterday with the press conference on the Emergencies Act, that it's being proposed that the RCMP will be given the powers to enforce municipal bylaws. We know OPP is the primary police force in Ontario, so I think it would be very important to include them as well, because we need to make sure that all of our police forces are working in tandem, working together, and that we know what they're intending to do with these new powers that the government has received under the Emergencies Act. The Public Safety Committee has an essential role to safeguard, to review and safeguard Canadian civil liberties. And I believe all members of this committee believe in that mission and support that mission. So, without further ado, I say let's move this motion to get the OPP added onto the calendar here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Point of order, please.
Point of order, Mr. McKinnon.
Yes, I believe we're probably done speaking to these witnesses. I would suggest that we give them our profuse thanks and ask them to withdraw.
You're on mute, Chair. You're on mute, Chair.
If we can deal with the amended motion and the motion within the next 2 minutes or 3, there would still be most of 10 minutes left. So why don't we deal with the motion first and then make the decision about whether or not to dismiss the witnesses? So is there any other discussion of the amended motion?
Mr. Chair, in the room, we have Mr. Melilo.
Go ahead, Mr. Melilo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think we have a few folks that do want to speak to this, so I would actually echo Mr. McKinnon's point of order and say that I think it would be time to allow our witnesses to leave and thank them for their testimony. But I do want to speak to the amendment that Mr. Lloyd has put forward. I think it's very important. Obviously, the government is moving forward with an unprecedented action that we're seeing right now, and I think it would be a great benefit for this committee to have additional opportunity for accountability and looking at what the role is going to be for the OPP, in Windsor and in Ottawa and what we're seeing across the province. So I'm in favor of the motion that the NDP have put forward, but I believe that the amendment Mr. Lloyd is is suggesting is incredibly reasonable and very important right now given the circumstances.
Are there other hands up in the room?
Mr. Van Popta and then Mr. Shipley.
Good, thank you.
Ben, sorry. I'm going to make the decision to thank our witnesses. There just won't be any more time left, and I regret that, but those are the rules that constrain us all. So thank you very much, witnesses, for your insight. Very emotional and very important and very impactful. So thank you very much for that.